Hey guys, welcome back to Home Built, and in this episode I am finally going to be cutting up my Ferrari intake. Yes, today is finally the day I am going to be cutting up the Ferrari intake, but before we get to that, let's just go back and have a bit more of a look at the radiator, which I was working on last week, and go through some of the things people were bringing up about my fan shroud. Okay, so let's discuss this radiator fan shroud that I built last week. There were lots of comments and some good suggestions, and basically one of the issues that people are sort of looking at is that it blocks a lot of the radiator for the high-speed flow. And I hadn't actually seen it, but on a lot of modern cars, they actually have some extra flaps in, like a plastic flap that opens and closes. So at low speed, when there's not a lot of movement, the flaps will get sucked closed by the fans, sucking in, and the fans will be keeping the air moving through the radiator. But then at high speed, when the fans are slower than what the car is actually traveling, these flaps get blown open and the air can travel through. I'm actually thinking that this would work completely fine for this application. My radiator is enormous. It is massive overkill for what I want. I just went the absolute biggest thing I could fit. But to do it now, to just ensure that there is definitely no issues, I've actually got a sheet of rubber, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a bunch of holes up in here. Let's mount some rubber, a couple of rubber flaps over the top, one there and one down the bottom, and at high speed it'll blow open, and then at low speed it can suck the rubber closed against the shroud, and the fans will be working efficiently. So let's start drilling some holes. All right, so there we go. We have our strips with plenty of holes through there to let a lot more air through at higher speed. I now have my sheet of rubber that I've just cut out, so I'm just going to make up a couple of strips of aluminium to sit on the top, and I'll rivet it on over the top. So then we have my flappy holes in my radiator. All right, my pop rivet gun has just died, but you get the idea. I'll finish this off at a later date. It's not really that important right now. Still got to pull it apart to paint it anyway. But there's the flap, so when I'm going at low speeds, the fans will be sucking through, and this will be sucked flat and closed. And then at higher speeds, when the air getting pushed through the front is more powerful than the fans themselves, it'll flap these open, and we'll get a lot more airflow. So fan shroud done. Let's start looking at a Ferrari intake. All right, I'm going to go through this again because I know that most of the comments, the same comments I've had 50 times already, going, why didn't you do this or why didn't you do that? So let me run through just some of the details again about why I'm going to lower this plenum and why it's not that bad of an idea and why it's not that crazy. Yes, you could have done it your way, but let me run through some of the super common suggestions. Could I replace it with individual throttle bodies? Yes, I could. It would make the runners much, much shorter than what they currently are. It would probably sound amazing, but they're quite expensive. And one of the big things that I do want to keep is this top cover, because this is one of the only things that says Ferrari on it. And if I'm going to all this effort to put a Ferrari engine in an Alfa, I want it to be sort of reasonably obvious when I open the bonnet that it is a Ferrari engine and not me just explaining it. Once these are off, you can see a couple of horses on the front of the timing belt covers down here, but there is no Ferrari obvious written anywhere else on the engine that you can see without delving deep into it. Also, these look really cool. I really like the look of them, so that is one of the big things. Now, a lot of people were commenting, can I take these off and maybe lie them down on the side? So lie, this one down this way and that one down that way. No, you can't. Should I 3D print a whole new manifold? No, and I'll go through why both of those options are not good options either. If I take this really nice looking cover off, so with the cover off, you can actually see that this is only an 8-cylinder engine, but as you can see here, there are 16 bell mouths in here, and why is that, would you ask? Well, that is because this inlet here on this side actually takes the air in, runs through here, across and down into the cylinder on this side. So each one of these on the inner lot take the air and cross over and bring them down either side. And then by the time it gets to higher revs, there is actually a little vacuum cylinder here that opens up valves inside this lot, and then at higher revs, the longer runner is not as necessary, and you just want to get air in as quick as you can, and it will suck air directly down through these second lot of bell mounts. So that is one of the reasons why you can't cut this in half. I mean, you could cut this in half and just have the outer bell mounts, but you're really shortening the intake, the runner length. As you can see, by me taking out 70 mil out of here, it's actually not reducing the runner length by a great deal. These are still far longer than any ITB I could fit on this car. So I'm not shortening that much. Yes, it may alter the bottom end by a tiny fraction, but really nothing to write home about, and it's definitely not going to really affect the performance of this tiny little light car that weighs, maybe 2/3 of what when it's finished will weigh about 2/3 of what the original Ferrari 360 did. So I think it's going to have plenty of pep. It's going to be quick. So hopefully that has answered a lot of your questions. Oh, another one was use the Maserati manifold. The Maserati engine is a fraction of the cost of this engine. It doesn't rev as high. I looked at them and they're similar, but even like my adapter plate won't work on a Maserati engine. It's completely different. The basic architecture is the same, but they are a very different engine. The outside is different. So I'm not using the Maserati bits. That's why I'm doing it. Let's get it off and start doing some measuring. All right, so this is where I start trying to cobble things together and work out how to actually cut this down and get it to the size I want. So I know I want to take 70 millimeters out of these runners, and basically what I can actually see here is there is actually like a vertical part that looks like it's basically the same diameter, but when it gets down to the bottom down here, it actually goes from round to oval. So that starts at about the bottom of my 70 millimeter mark, and at the top, this is where the end of the radius from the horizontal to the vertical goes. So that's my mark, that's the top mark there. The way I'm going to do it is I've got my nice flat bench. I found a paint tin from my friends at Concept Paints that I just had sitting around, and that's about the right size. I'm going to tape this marker on so that it sits exactly the right height that I want. I'll tape it there, and then I can use this as a flat level thing to slide around and draw around every runner all the way around this so that I get everything at exactly the same height. That worked really well. My very scientific method of marking out on my inlet manifold, but that has given me quite nice even lines all the way around to get it nice and square. If I stick to those lines, I should be good. So now is where I get to the tricky bit where I need to actually hack into it. Fingers crossed this is going to be something that's going to weld nicely. But there's not much to do but to actually just give it a go. So was a lot of work, but there is definitely no turning back now. I have my separate pieces cut off of the car, so now it's time to trim them again. I need to, this side at least I can put on the bandsaw. This, I just had to get through it. I can tidy up the faces now and get them flat. I'll get them flat with a straight edge and get them as neat as I can. And we'll get these two other sections on the bandsaw and then see how we go cobbling them together. That sits so much better. Obviously my cuts are still very rough and it's just all sitting in place, but you can see, I mean, that's the chunks I took out, so it's sitting much lower, but the bonnet line is much better. Obviously I'm still gonna need a bonnet bulge. It does still sit a bit high at the front, which I knew it was always going to, but that's as low as I'm gonna be able to get it. So a bonnet bulge will cover that up nicely, but it's now well below the line of that back scuttle panel. So it is going to look the business. All right, so I've cut them all off, but as you can see, I pretty much just hacked into them and get them all into shape. I left a little bit here space to start getting them nice and neat and flat and tidy. I'm gonna put them now on the linisher, try and just square it all up, get it all nice and neat and tidy so I have a nice clean fit all the way around. Then we can start looking at what we're going to do about welding. All right, so that is sitting really nicely now. So let's start looking at chamfering the edges of all these, because basically what I want to do, because I want to weld it, and it's quite thick, what I'm going to do is knock the edges right back, just leaving the inner wall of the runners so that it's just touching on the inner wall, and then I can fill all that chamfer. I can sort of weld in that whole chamfered edge, and then I should have a nice, strong, solid bond. I know a lot of you are freaking out that I'm going to be welding this because I have very little TIG experience. I have been doing some practice. This was just a manifold I took off a wreck, and you can sort of see here some practice welds I've been doing. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good with a bit of a grind and a polish up. It's definitely well and truly solid. It's not going anywhere, so that will do the job, and it's not. There's no holes. This won't leak, so I'm quite happy that I can do the same on this manifold. So let's start chamfering some edges so that we can get a nice spot to weld. So I've gone through now, I've ground around and made a nice deep groove on both sides of the manifold, and well, the top part of the manifold and the bottom part of the manifold. So the fit is now really nice and neat and tight and looking good. But I am not going to weld it together on the bench like this because there is no chance it's going to fit again. So you know what that means? It means it's time to pull the engine out again. Yay! All right, so as many of you know, I am far from an experienced welder, a very inexperienced TIG welder, and I'm going to weld this myself. Now, before I start on the manifold itself, I've got these pieces I cut off, I've prepared them in the same way, and I'm going to practice first on these so I can get my settings right, get everything dialed in so I'm happy with it before I actually tackle the important bits. Okay, so it's not fantastic, but I've had some reasonable luck here doing these welds. They look good enough for me. Okay, they're not perfect, they're not the prettiest. There's a bit of black schmutz, that'll all wipe off. It's still very hot, but I am happy enough to run with what I brung. Let's give it a go on the real thing. All right, and we have the manifold welded on. It is not pretty. The welds are far from the prettiest things around, but they're going to hold. There's a few really ugly bits in the inside where I haven't been able to get. You can see some contamination stuff in there. I'm going to have to do that when I get the manifold off the car. There's only a couple of tiny bits. A lot of them are welded all the way around. Not very nice, but they're done. Like there's a little gap in that one there. But the rest of them are nice and solid. You can also see on the inside most of the way down. It's probably hard to see in that light, but they are all welded, most of the way welded around the inside. So I know it's not pretty, but you have to remember this is not a structural part of the car. It's also not a, it's an inlet manifold. It's not a very specific, precise part of the car. It doesn't have to be machine perfect. I will be going around the inside of the welds with a die grinder next week. But for the time being, I want to leave it on the engine until it's completely cold before I attempt to take it off of here. Hopefully that is good. The last little bits, I said, I'll still weld them up later. I know this is going to be a controversial episode, and heaps of you think I've done everything wrong. My welding is definitely not great, but it's good enough for this. And once I grind it back and tidy this all up, you won't see it. It'll blend in nicely, and it's far and away good enough for what I'm doing here. All right, guys. Well, that is all I'm going to do for today. So that means it's time for Fun Facts with Mrs. Jeff.
Hey guys, the Alfa Romeo 75 was first introduced in 1985 to replace the Giulietta, and it was praised for its almost perfect 50-50 weight distribution. This was due to the car having a rear-mounted transaxle instead of the regular style gearbox mounted behind the engine. Initially offered with a range of inline 4 cylinders, in 1986 the 75 Turbo was released with a 1.8 litre turbo 4-cylinder making 155 horsepower. Alfa also released a 2.5 litre V6 with similar power to the turbo and a 3 litre version for the US market, but they all struggled to sell. In 1987, 500 examples of the Turbo Evoluzione were released to meet Group A requirements. Although the power claimed was the same as that of the regular turbo, the engine was actually equipped for more power upgrades. Overall, the 75 was quite commercially successful, with over 230,000 cars produced during its 3-year run.
All right, I'm really happy with how that came out today. My welding definitely leaves something to be desired, but it's more than enough for what we need to do here, and that is going to fit much, much better in the engine bay than it did before. Before it was just going to be ridiculous sticking out of the bonnet, and I didn't want it to be so stupid. It's going to need a bulge, but that's good. But
Okay.
we're getting there.
If you'd like to see the videos a day early, please follow us on Patreon. We're very grateful to our Patreon supporters. And follow us on Facebook, Instagram.
Yep. Like, subscribe,
So
hit
on.
the bell, all that jazz, and we'll see you on the next one.
See you next time.
See you guys.
Hey guys. The 1.6 litre turbo. Oh, damn it. As the what? 500 examples were released from turbo. There's actually more power available for upgrades, so we can do that again.